people have access to some form of financial services for savings and loan services. In addition to this, the informal sector, which engages over 80% of the population, has up to 90% of its actors outside the formal financial systems because of high perceived risk. Cumulatively, the sector represents an over 300 billion lending gap that needs to be bridged. Even with these significant market gaps, Africa is home to only 2% of the world's microfinance investments. The market gap is therefore substantial for microfinance growth in Africa. However, climate change stands as an existential threat to tapping into these opportunities. About 65 days ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published a seed assessment report. The findings of these scientific analyses have been described in some quarters as apocalyptic, underscoring that the globe is on its way to reach the 1.5 degrees warming in just 2 decades from today. On every 1 degree of warming, extreme daily precipitation events will intensify by 7%. For Africa, the continent already in adversity is already heating up twice as fast as the rest of the globe. This only means risk severity will be escalated. Whether it is the worst drought we are witnessing, in Kenya here 2.1 million citizens are at risk of starvation, and down to Madagascar, as we've already seen in the news, and to the Sahel, or we're talking about the floodings we are seeing across African cities, exposed to torrential rains. The die is cast. This risk are further escalating the socio-economic challenges, the socio-economic misery that is already a breaking point for many across the continent. From 257 million citizens going to bed each and every night experiencing hunger, to the over 60 million malnourished children where climate change is already lowering the nutritional value of food. And this is happening amidst 12 million youth who get into the labor market each and every year, and amidst shrinking economies that remain disenfranchised in unemployment. To health, where in addition to the declining nutritional value of food, which is the first line of defense against infections, the temperature and precipitation variability is already causing a surge in vector-borne diseases like malaria, where Africa already carries up to 93% of annual global malaria deaths. Despite all this, as you've already heard, another variable, the COVID-19 global pandemic, has been added to this equation of stresses. This escalation of climate risk spelled doom to market opportunities that the microfinance sector needs to tap for its growth in Africa. But just as an insightful African proverb reminds us, rain does not fall on one roof alone. Climate change presents both risk and opportunities, and the financial sector is not exempted from these risks, nor excluded from tapping into these attendant opportunities. But how microfinance institutions can buffer themselves against this climate change risk while tapping into good opportunities from Africa's climate response is our own FIERS agency of now, and this calls for the full operationalization of key enablers. The first, we must leverage climate action as an investment opportunity. The climate change narrative across the entirety of Africa must urgently graduate from projecting liability to projecting opportunities as we leverage mitigation actions to power adaptation. Seizing the opportunity to finance enterprise actions captured within countries' nationally determined contributions in the continent is the way to go. As we're speaking today, up to 98% of African countries have ratified their climate action plan, what is called the NDCs. And over 70% of them have prioritized sustainable agriculture as adaptation commitments. They have prioritized clean energy investment as mitigation commitments. Implementing these two areas in complementarity, where clean energy is decentralized to communities to power agro-value addition, will open up enterprise opportunities. Lessons from the work we've done in Europe have shown that decentralizing simple climate action solutions of solar dryers to agro actors in communities across the continent can effectively and efficiently dehydrate perishables and increase share life. We've seen this during COVID, where post-harvest losses have been cut and increased earnings up to 30 times. The scalability of this approach, therefore, is multiplied when we consider that we are in a continent that loses up to 48 billion in post-harvest losses each and every year. And tapping into this can increase incomes and create revenues. Another aspect that we cannot overlook is in clean cooking, where charcoal harvesting is responsible for forest degradation, where charcoal is responsible for indoor pollution that causes over 700,000 lives each and every year in the continent, killing our brothers and sisters, and mothers and fathers who have committed no crime. And the only thing is that they don't have alternatives, and that's why they use charcoal. But simple climate action solutions, waste recovery to clean cooking fuel briquettes provides a viable alternative to charcoal. The availability of clean cooking solutions is at a low of 10%. In other words, it means 9 out of 10 times you are likely to find charcoal in the market than clean cooking fuel briquettes. This is a glaring market gap, an enterprise action that can bridge the accessibility gap and tap into the 20 billion a year market opportunity currently dominated by charcoal. The microfinance sector should prioritize financing enterprises that engage in these areas prioritized in Africa's NDC. That takes me to the second point. We must target informal sector players as the most significant constituency in Africa's economies. The story of Africa is incomplete without the informal sector. This is a fact, because the sector is the chassis on which Africa's economic locomotive strives. Over 80% of the productive population in Africa is engaged in this sector, that we know. And the most significant financing gap of over 300 billion lending gap in the informal sector represents an opportunity that remains untapped because of high perceived risk. Microfinance institutions should therefore target devising low-risk financing instruments to bridge this gap and tap into opportunities. And that takes me to the third point. We must tap into Africa's youth ingenuity as the driver of economic competitiveness. You cannot address any challenge while ignoring your powerhouse. Africa's youth are Africa's powerhouse. Yes, they are. And tapping into their ingenuity, retooling their skills, represents a formidable strategy for the microfinance sector to leverage. And engaging them will ensure local innovations can be developed. And engaging them will ensure what they develop is tailored to the needs of the informal sector. We have developed an incubation approach called Innovative Volunteerism, where we're engaging these young people, structurally guiding them. And we are seeing them turning their passions into profit, developing, decentralizing simple climate action solutions that is helping to build resilience of communities, like simple solar dryers, helping mothers in villages to reduce their post-harvest losses. We are seeing them turning simple agricultural waste into fuel briquettes, into biofertilizers. It therefore means microfinance institutions should invest in developing dedicated climate financing products that are attractive to youth from an enterprise-driven dimension. That takes me to the fourth point. Factoring in the climate risk in investment financing is critical. Yes, it is. Climate change is already shrinking Africa's economies, with income losses projected up to 75%. These losses manifest through lost productivity and damage in vital economic sectors like agriculture, which has been the bedrock of success for Africa's microfinance institutions. This means that when financing such sectors, financial institutions should prioritize and demand that actors prioritize climate resilient actions that will buffer against climate change and those failure risk. For example, climate change threatens to lower yields of essential staples in the continent by up to 40% if we hit 2 degrees. But financiers should prioritize financing climate resilient ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, simple approaches that have been proven to not only increase yields by up to 128% under the changing climate. A simple example like Zai in the Sahel, a Zai technique, a traditional soil conservation approach shown to increase yields by up to 500%. This is not magic, this is logic. We are seeing solutions across the continent. Financiers prioritizing climate resilient solutions, simple like solar dryer, solar power irrigation can increase yields by up to 100%, can save water by up to 80% and increase incomes. And that takes me to the last point. Prioritize partnerships for risk divestment. Enhance collaboration between microfinance institutions and local low-risk financing structures already popular with the informal sector. In this case, local communal cooperatives dotted across the continent. While most informal sector actors do not have official bank accounts, they have very elaborate social networks of communal cooperatives where they have built social capital as trusted borrowers. Microfinance institutions can leverage this local cooperative as an additional layer of risk diversification towards tapping the opportunities presented by financing climate action enterprise in the informal sector. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, not everyone that chased the zebra caught it, but he who caught it chased it. This African proverb is a firm reminder that the only way to win is first to take chances. The microfinance industry in Africa stands a chance to win with climate action. But rather, we must all take our chances. We must not lose sight of what I call soft aspects. I'm talking about inspiration here. We must inspire one another. I'm talking about selflessness and fidelity to a cause that is bigger than our individual selves. These are the building blocks of purposeful passion. If we do not inspire people to see opportunity, regardless of what we do, we will not be able to build a resilient community. Because passion is the new currency of now, and we should never forget about this. We owe ourselves the task of doing so to inspire active and rational hope in order to turn climate change challenges into investment opportunities that work for each and everyone. In the circles of life, there comes a unique challenge that befalls a generation, which must be solved to guarantee the safe existence of future generations. Yes, climate change is the challenge of this generation. Let us therefore pull together and make inclusive financing a reality as we build the resilience of communities across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that extremely vibrant eye-opener. Obviously, it's very difficult for us to draw a line between climate change and poverty. Richard, over to you. And if you look at the role of climate change across all our SDGs, you find that especially when you look at climate, the SDG number 13 that talks about the role of climate change and the role of the urban poor. One of the things that I want to get from you, Richard, is that what bigger role would you see the microfinance institutions, the ones that are really planted close to the vulnerable poor, play? You talk about solar. You gave us an example of how that has impacted billions of jobs. But we also need to understand that in our typical African villages, we need firewood. People need to cut trees to cook for their own livelihoods. What bigger impact, Richard, would you like to be seen, especially by the microfinance institutions?
Thank you very much for the question. And that question can be answered with two words: alternatives and incentives. And let me start with alternatives. Over 80% of households in the continent depend on wood biomass. They depend on that because they don't have an alternative. And as I did say it in my opening remarks, we are seeing up to 700,000 Africans die every year in the latest statistics that we have across the continent. I mean, this is something that should worry each and everyone. And they're dying because our mothers harvest charcoal because they don't have alternatives. But we need to start building on clean solutions which are seemingly available, like turning agricultural waste to fuel briquettes, and get our youth, inspire them to then be able to retool their skills and start doing that. That is a huge market because the charcoal market across the entire African continent is 20 billion US dollars. And when you look at clean solutions, we have only 10%. That means 90% is an opportunity that we need to fill with alternatives. That our mothers in villages are not cooking with charcoal because they like it. That's the only thing they have. But when we provide them with opportunities of fuel briquettes that are cheaper than charcoal, we will be closing a very big gap. Now, on the incentives, incentives bring change in behavior. They bring market shifts. And across the entire African continent, most of the countries have already put incentives in place. If you take Kenya here in 2016, they took up VAT on liquid petroleum gas. And that saw a shift in market and also a shift in opportunities, where they had only 9 liquid petroleum gas plants that rose up to about 300 in just about 5 years. And we saw the number of people who are using that increased. In their recent Finance Act 2021, they actually took off VAT from burgers, from fuel briquettes. But the question we need to then ask is, even when the incentives are in place, do we have willing people who are taking and seizing the opportunities to then create opportunities? And that's why in my remarks I said, if you throw money, through opportunity on passionless young people, nothing will change. And therefore, we can never miss inspiration when it comes to these aspects. Yes, climate is changing. Yes, there is a gap, but we need people. It is people who do development. And that is what we need to focus on. See the challenge of depending on charcoal as a disguised opportunity and provide an alternative of clean solutions. That is a market gap. That is an employment gap for our young people as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Richard, we're going to go to you. There is a specific question that did come in around climate change and what that means from a conflict perspective, how in conflict zones we can address issues of climate change. Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charles, and thanks to Brian and Asa. I think Brian and Asa had already alluded to some of the aspects, but let me just say this. If you close your eyes to facts, you will learn through accidents. And let me just put this in perspective here. We cannot afford to neglect the facts when it comes to climate change and security. About 80% of countries that host most multilateral peace operations are highly exposed to climate change facts across the continent. This shows the direct correlation between high climate risk and instability and conflict. But the point is that climate change is a threat multiplier, and it has the availability of primary socio-economic opportunities, primary socio-economic resources like water, like fertile lands, and as a result of this, it exacerbates tensions among affected populations as they compete for diminishing resources and inflaming conflict. But one of the most important aspects I'm trying to pass here is that if you tell a hungry child that you gave him or her food yesterday, that means nothing to that child at that moment because that child is hungry. When people don't have economic opportunities, they will resort to the alternative. And climate change is actually plunging millions into suffering, crop failure, making sure that at least people don't have alternatives. And so the message is simple in answering that question. Without socio-economic opportunities to build resilience of population, the struggle for survival that ensues then means that conflict becomes inevitable. But the last point on that is this. We have data that shows youth unemployment has been correlated with increased terrorism across the globe. And climate change, diminishing economic growth means it contributes to youth unemployment. But let's also not forget that conflict is not just holding the fighting with guns. There is also conflict in the minds of people who go to bed hungry. They don't have food. That's conflict. It's conflict of food insecurity. It's conflict of alternatives. And therefore, at the end of the day, a clear strategy that needs to be fostered should be the integration of climate action from an investment opportunity so that everybody can have the socio-economic strong base to put food on the table and money in more pockets.
Thank you so much, Richard. I have about 5 minutes. So if anyone feels they have a burning issue, or there's a gentleman right here in the middle column in a green shirt, I'll take another one up there. I can see it's becoming more and more. And yeah, this one here.